Being polite is good. Being strategic is better. Most people confuse the two during traffic stops. They think answering every question is respectful, but respect doesn't require giving up control. There's a big difference between following the law and volunteering information. Smart drivers understand that traffic stops are procedural, not personal. Officers are doing a job, and you should protect yourself the same way. There are certain words that don't sound rude, don't escalate tension, and don't make things awkward, but they do one powerful thing: they stop the fishing. These phrases signal that you know how stops are supposed to work. When that happens, the entire tone changes. The stop becomes shorter, cleaner, and more focused. In this video, I'll show you the smart words that end a traffic stop fast without drama, attitude, or mistakes. Number 1. Are you extending the stop beyond its original purpose? This sentence sounds simple, but it is one of the most powerful things you can say during a traffic stop because it speaks directly to how the law views police authority. A traffic stop is not an open-ended conversation. Under constitutional law, an officer may stop you only for a specific reason, such as speeding, a broken taillight, or another observable traffic violation. Once that reason is handled by checking your license, writing a ticket, or issuing a warning, the legal purpose of the stop is finished. The officer does not get unlimited time to keep you on the roadside just to see what else might turn up. This principle comes from court rulings that say a stop cannot be prolonged without new, independent, reasonable suspicion. In simple terms, the stop must stay tied to why you were pulled over in the first place. When you ask, "Are you extending the stop beyond its original purpose?" you are not accusing the officer of wrongdoing. You are asking for clarification. That is important. The wording is professional and neutral, which reduces tension. At the same time, it quietly forces the officer to think about whether they actually have a legal reason to continue holding you there. If the answer is no, the law requires the stop to end. If the answer is yes, they must be able to articulate what that reason is. Either way, the encounter moves toward a conclusion instead of dragging on. This phrase is especially effective when questioning starts to drift away from the traffic issue. Questions like "Where are you coming from?" or "Do you have anything illegal in the car?" are not automatically related to a traffic violation. Those questions are usually part of an investigation, not a citation. By using this sentence, you draw a clear line between a traffic stop and a criminal investigation, which the law treats very differently. Officers are trained to recognize this distinction, and many will shorten the stop once it is raised. It is also important to understand your role when saying this. You should not argue, debate, or explain. Ask the question once, calmly, and then stop talking. Silence after the question is what gives it weight. If the officer chooses to continue anyway, you have still protected yourself by clearly asserting your rights. That matters later, especially if the stop is reviewed in court. The best advice is to use this phrase as a timing tool, not a weapon. Say it after the original purpose of the stop appears complete, or when delays feel unrelated. Keep your tone respectful and your words minimal. This approach shows that you understand the law, respect the process, and expect the stop to follow legal limits. Number 2. Is there reasonable suspicion beyond the traffic violation? This phrase is powerful because it uses the exact legal standard that controls how far a traffic stop can go. Under the law, an officer is allowed to stop you when they have reasonable suspicion that a traffic violation has occurred. That suspicion must be based on specific, observable facts, not a feeling or a hunch. Once the traffic issue is addressed, the officer cannot continue detaining you unless they develop new reasonable suspicion of a separate crime. This rule exists to prevent stops from turning into open-ended investigations based on curiosity. In simple terms, the law does not allow officers to fish for problems without a real reason. When you ask, "Is there reasonable suspicion beyond the traffic violation?" you are not saying the officer is wrong. You are asking them to identify the legal basis for continuing the stop. That matters because reasonable suspicion is not vague. It must be something concrete, such as seeing contraband in plain view, smelling alcohol, or observing behavior that clearly indicates impairment. If none of that exists, the law says the stop should end. This single sentence forces the officer to mentally check whether they actually meet that standard. This phrase is especially effective when a stop starts as something minor but slowly shifts into investigative questioning. You may notice questions about travel plans, passengers, or unrelated topics. Those questions are often used to build suspicion through conversation. By using this sentence, you cut off that process. You're essentially saying, if there is a legal reason to continue, please state it. If not, the stop should be over. Officers understand the weight of that question because it is the same language courts use when reviewing stops later. It is important to say this calmly and only once. The goal is not to debate the officer's answer or challenge their authority on the roadside. The goal is to clearly assert your rights and create a clean moment in the interaction. If the officer has reasonable suspicion, they will proceed. If they do not, many officers will end the stop shortly after because continuing without justification creates legal risk for them. From a practical standpoint, this phrase also protects you even if the encounter does not immediately end. If the encounter is ever reviewed, your question shows that you did not consent to an expanded investigation and that you understood the limits of the stop. That matters in court. The best advice is to pair this sentence with silence afterward. Let the law do the work for you. Number 3. I'm declining to participate in investigative questioning. This sentence is effective because it draws a clear line between what the law requires you to do and what is purely voluntary. During a traffic stop, you are legally required to provide certain information, such as your driver's license, registration, and insurance. Beyond that, most questions are not mandatory. Officers often ask additional questions to gather information, create inconsistencies, or develop suspicion. This is known as investigative questioning. The law allows officers to ask these questions, but it does not require you to answer them. That distinction is critical, and this phrase asserts it cleanly. When you say, "I'm declining to participate in investigative questioning," you are not saying you refuse to cooperate with lawful orders. You are simply choosing not to volunteer statements. The wording is professional and non-confrontational, which helps keep the situation calm. It also avoids common mistakes, such as giving partial answers or guessing, which can unintentionally create problems. Many drivers talk themselves into longer stops or deeper investigations without realizing it. This phrase stops that from happening. Legally, this statement is rooted in your right against self-incrimination. In simple terms, you are not required to help build a case against yourself. Casual questions like "where are you coming from?" or "have you had anything to drink?" may sound harmless, but answers to those questions can be used later. Even innocent answers can be misunderstood or misremembered. By declining investigative questioning, you protect yourself from that risk. This phrase is also effective because it changes the dynamic of the stop. Officers rely on conversation to expand a stop beyond its original purpose. When questioning stops, the encounter becomes procedural again. That often leads to a faster conclusion because there is nothing left to explore. The officer must either proceed with lawful enforcement or end the stop. It is important to use this phrase once and then remain silent. Repeating it or adding explanations can weaken its impact. Silence after asserting your choice is not rude, it is legally meaningful. You should still comply with lawful instructions, such as remaining in the vehicle or handing over documents, but you do not need to answer questions. The best advice is to stay calm, keep your tone respectful, and let this sentence do the work. It signals that you understand your rights and intend to exercise them without conflict. Number 4. I'm not waiving any rights, explicit or implied. This sentence is powerful because it protects you from something most people do without realizing it, giving up rights unintentionally. In everyday situations, silence or cooperation is often interpreted as agreement. During a traffic stop, that can be dangerous. The law recognizes that people can waive certain rights either explicitly by clearly saying yes or implicitly through actions that suggest consent. For example, stepping aside, answering certain questions, or allowing a search without objection can later be argued as implied consent. This phrase is designed to stop that from happening. When you say, "I'm not waiving any rights, explicit or implied," you are clearly stating that nothing you say or do should be interpreted as permission beyond what the law requires. This matters because officers often rely on implied consent to justify searches, extended questioning, or delays. By using this sentence, you remove ambiguity. You are not accusing the officer of wrongdoing, you are simply protecting your legal position. From a legal standpoint, this phrase ties directly to constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures and the right to remain silent. Courts often examine whether a person voluntarily gave up those rights. A clear verbal statement like this makes it much harder to argue that you consented through behavior or silence. Even if an officer proceeds anyway, your statement creates a clean record that you did not agree. This phrase is especially useful when an officer phrases a request in a casual or indirect way, such as, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, right?" Many people respond by hesitating or staying quiet, which can be interpreted as consent. By stating that you are not waiving any rights, you prevent that interpretation without escalating the encounter. The key to using this sentence correctly is tone and timing. Say it calmly once and then stop talking. Do not argue about the law on the roadside. Do not explain why you are saying it. Your goal is not to win a debate, it is to preserve your rights. You should still comply with lawful orders, such as providing documents or exiting the vehicle if required by law, but you are making it clear that compliance does not equal consent. The best advice is to think of this phrase as a legal safety net. It protects you from misunderstandings, pressure, and assumptions. It keeps the encounter clean, professional, and within legal boundaries. Number 5. If there's no enforcement action, I'd like to resume travel. This sentence is effective because it is polite, professional, and firmly grounded in how traffic stops are supposed to work under the law. A traffic stop exists for one purpose: enforcement. That enforcement may be a ticket, a warning, or another lawful action related to the stop. If no enforcement action is taking place, the legal justification for keeping you on the roadside disappears. This phrase calmly brings the focus back to that reality without sounding confrontational. When you say, if there's no enforcement action, I'd like to resume travel, you're not demanding anything. You are stating a reasonable expectation. The wording matters. It acknowledges the officer's authority to enforce the law while also asserting your right to leave once that enforcement is complete. Courts have consistently held that drivers cannot be detained longer than necessary to complete the purpose of the stop. This sentence reflects that principle in plain language. This phrase works best at the moment when it feels like the stop has stalled, your documents have been returned, or the conversation has shifted away from the original reason for the stop. At that point, many drivers stay quiet because they are unsure what to say. This sentence fills that gap in a smart way. It gently forces the officer to make a decision, either take enforcement action or end the stop. Legally, this statement also helps distinguish between a detention and a voluntary encounter. Once enforcement is finished, any further interaction should be voluntary. By saying you would like to resume travel, you are clearly declining a voluntary conversation without being rude. That clarity matters. It reduces the chance of confusion about whether you felt free to leave. The most important part of using this phrase is what comes next: silence. Do not argue if the officer responds with more questions. Do not explain your travel plans or justify your request. If the officer has a lawful reason to continue, they will state it. If not, many officers will conclude the stop shortly after. The best advice is to use this sentence as a closing line, not an opening one. It signals that you respect the process but also value your time and rights. Said calmly and once, it often leads to exactly what you want: a clear end to the stop and the ability to continue on your way.